We continue now at the top of Daf 85a Daf in Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 85a. On the previous summit, Rabbi Yochanan said that if one slaughters an animal at night inside the Beis HaMikdash, and then he's mala b'chutz, he offers it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, so he is liable for mala b'chutz, for offering it outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and that's true even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that if one slaughters an animal at night in the Beis HaMikdash and it goes up on the Mizbeach, it comes down from the Mizbeach. So normally we might say that something that's going to come down from the Mizbeach, so if you're mala that b'chutz, one's not going to be considered liable for that. But Rabbi Yochanan continues and says, in this case, lo tei pechusa mishochet b'chutz umala b'chutz. It's no worse than, let's say, he actually slaughters it outside the mikdash and offers it outside the mikdash. In that case, one is liable. So if he slaughters it in the Beis HaMikdash at night and then offers it mala b'chutz, offers it outside, that is going to be the same thing, and the individual is liable. Rashi explains, lo tei pechusa mishochet b'chutz umalo sa b'chutz. It's no less than slaughtering it outside the mikdash and then offering it outside the mikdash. The kaimulan b'hashochet, we establish in hashochet later on, the chayiv al shchitasa v'al aliyasa, he's chayiv on the slaughtering and he's chayiv on offering it outside of the mikdash. And the Gemara continues, Mesev Rav Chia bar Avin. Rav Chia bar Avin asks on Rabbi Yochanan from a Mishnah coming up later on. It says, Hashochet of bifnim, if somebody slaughters a bird inside the mikdash, umala b'chutz pater, and then he offers it outside the mikdash, so he's pater. And shachat b'chutz, but if he slaughters the bird outside the mikdash, umala b'chutz, and offers it outside the mikdash, then chayiv, then he's liable in such a situation. And so the Gemara says, Nema, we should say they're the same argument. Lo tei pechusa mishochet umala b'chutz, we should say that if it's true that if he slaughters it outside and offers it outside, he's liable. So then the case where he slaughters it inside and then offers it outside, it shouldn't be any worse, and one should be liable as well, according to that logic, if you say this logic of lo tei pechusa. And the Gemara says, Tiyufta, the Gemara says, indeed, that is a refutation. And the Gemara continues with an alternative answer. If you want, we could say, that actually it's different by slaughtering a bird, because when you slaughter the bird, by bird karbanis, you're supposed to do malika, which is the bird is pinched essentially by the area of the neck instead of shchita, instead of slaughtering. So when one slaughters the bird inside, that's just like killing the bird, and that's why that case is different. And Rashi explains, Hashochet of kachim b'fnim, if somebody slaughters a bird that is kachim inside the mikdash, v'aleyo b'chutz pater, and then he offers it outside, he's pater, al haliyos, he's pater on the offering. Deino miskabel b'fnim, because that's a case where it would not have been accepted inside the mikdash, and therefore you're not chayiv if you offer it outside the mikdash. Elamoluk, the only time that it's accepted inside the mikdash is through malika, as we said. Now shachto b'chutz v'aleyo b'chutz chayiv, if he slaughters it outside the mikdash and he offers it outside the mikdash, then he's liable al shtei, and Rashi says he's liable for both of them. To hashochet of kachim b'chutz chayiv, if somebody slaughters a bird that's kachim outside the mikdash, he's chayiv. This Rabbi me'o asher shochet b'perak hashochet, it's included from the pasuk in perak hashochet. V'chi aleyu b'chutz chayiv, and then when he offers it b'chutz, he's chayiv. The marbinon b'hashochet l'inyan haloas kol hanishchatin, we include in hashochet in terms of anything that's slaughtered that's offered. The chihechi the chayiv al shchitasan, that just like he's chayiv on the slaughtering, chayiv al halos, and he's also chayiv on the offering. The chsiv v'aleim tomar la'oref parshios, that comes from the pasuk that we mix those parshios together. And Rashi continues, the question of the Gemara was, V'amai, why should this be true? Hashochto b'fnim v'aleo b'chutz pater, that we say that if somebody slaughters inside and offers it outside, the person is pater. Why should that be true? Neimolo tei pechusa, we should say again, it's no worse than the situation of slaughtering it outside the mikdash and offering it outside the mikdash. And then the Gemara offered an answer, mikdal katli, in the case where he slaughters it in the mikdash, is just killing it, meaning lo shaycha shchita b'fnim klal. The whole concept of slaughtering a bird inside the mikdash is just not relevant. Doesn't exist. Lo b'chulin v'lo b'kachim, it wouldn't matter if it's not a carbon, it wouldn't matter if it is kachim, if it was sanctified. Aval shchitas laila, but when it comes to slaughtering at night, which was the case of Rabbi Yochanan, so there shchita hi b'chulin, that is considered slaughtering when it comes to a non-carbon. Hilkach b'kachim, therefore when it comes to something that is consecrated to a carbon, to kachim, so shchita psula hi krui, it is called a shchita, it is called a slaughtering that is disqualified, and that is the difference between the two cases. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ula says, a murei kachim kalim, if you have the sacrificial portions of kachim kalim, those are karbonos, again, of lesser kedusha, shehalon lifnei zrikas daman, that they were brought up on the mizbeach before the blood was thrown, so lo yerdu, they don't come down from the mizbeach, because nasu lachmo shal mizbeach, they become like the bread of the mizbeach. And the idea over here is that when it comes to the sacrificial portions of kachim kalim, really it's only after zrika that they belong, so to speak, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and here we're talking before Zrika, and Ula is saying that we apply this halacha of, again, im alu, that if they went up onto the Mizbeach, lo yerdu, they don't come down from the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Zera says, Afanon nami tanina, we learn this in the Mishnah. It says in the Mishnah, Shenishbach dama, it says if you have a situation where the blood was spilled, V'sheyatza dama chutz l'klaim, or let's say the blood left the curtains of the Azara. So it says that in those situations we say that what is on the Mizbeach stays on the Mizbeach. And in that situation, what's going on? That's before Zrika. There clearly wasn't a Zrika because the blood was either spilled or was taken outside of the Azara. And so Rabbi Zera says, now if over there, the Imbol Lizrok, if he wanted to do the Zrika, Ein Lo Lizrok, he wouldn't be able to do the Zrika. And Amrit, and what did we say? We said that in that kind of disqualification, Im Olu Lo Yerdu, that if it goes up on the Mizbeach, it doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. So Hacha over here, in this situation, the Imbol Lizrok Zorik, if he wants to do the Zrika, he could. The case just happens to be that the Emurim went up on the Mizbeach before the Zrika, but the blood is still around. So Lo Kal Shekain, so isn't it certainly true that the Emurim should stay on the Mizbeach? And the Gemara says, no, Tirgama Kachay Kachim, one can simply say that part of the Mishnah of Nishbach Dama, Sheyatza Dama Chutz L'Klaim, is not talking about Kachim Kalim. It's not talking about Karbonos of lesser Kedusha. It's talking about Kachay Kachim. It's talking about the Karbonos of greater Kedusha. And by those Karbonos, the Emurim right away really belong, so to speak, to the Mizbeach. And that's why that case is different. It wouldn't be relevant to Ula's case of Kachim Kalim. Rashi explains, Shenishbach dama, that the blood spilled, lo teired habasar. In that case, what did we say? We said that the meat of the carbon does not come down from the Mizbeach, imol if it went up on the Mizbeach. V'kasal kadaitach, and initially the Gemara thinks, Deveimure kachim kalim nami kai, that this is talking about the sacrificial portions of kachim kalim as well. Uma nishbach dama, now, if it's true that when the blood spills, the have aliyas basar lifnei zrika, there, clearly the meat went up before the Zrika, Ta'ain kan Zrika, because there is no Zrika. Ugriya mishar ol lifnei Zrika. It's actually worse than other cases where it goes up on the Mizbeach before Zrika. The Hasam goes over there and Bol Lizrok yesh lo ma'al Lizrok. If he wanted to do the Zrika, he has what to do Zrika with. V'hachabit over here and Bol Lizrok, if he wants to do Zrika, ain lo ma'al Lizrok. He has nothing to do Zrika with. V'afilu achi lo teir. Nevertheless, doesn't come down from the Mizbeach. It does not come down. It stays up. The kol shekain echad the lo nishbach. So certainly in a situation like over here, in the case of Ula, where again it went up before the Zrika, but it wasn't spilled. And the Gemara answered, Tirgama Kachay Kachim, that line about the spilled blood, about the blood that left outside of the Kloim, that's talking about Kachay Kachim, Perush HaMishnah Azos Bekachay Kachim. That's talking about Kachay Kachim, that part of the Mishnah. Shekatushas Haguf Alein Lefnei Zrika, there, the sanctity is upon it, even before the Zrika, as we said. But the Gemara continues and asks, Hare Pesach, but what about Karban Pesach, which is also mentioned in the Mishnah? The Kachim Kalim, that's a case of Kachim Kalim, and the Gemara right now is assuming that part of the Mishnah that mentions Karban Pesach is also talking about Nishbach Dama, talking about that exact same case we just brought, and therefore you see it is talking about Kachim Kalim. And the Gemara says, no, Tirgama, you interpret that part of the Mishnah which is dealing with the Karban Pesach, B'Shalo Lishman. That's just talking about a situation where the Karban Pesach is offered not for its sake. It's not talking about the case of Nishbach Dama over there. And Rashi explains, V'Arei Pesach Shaninu Bodekatani Seifa V'Hapesach V'Achatos. We mentioned Karban Pesach in the Mishnah. V'Kasal Gadaitach, and the Gemara initially thinks that Psule the Katani Bereisha Namikai, that also goes on the different disqualifications right before that. Could go Nim Nishbach Damo Yatza, like a case where the blood spills or it leaves. And the Gemara answered, Tirgama Shalo Lishmo. That line about Karban Pesach is talking about Shalo Lishmo. Pesach Lotana Le Ella Apsula de Shalo Lishmo. When we mentioned Karban Pesach, we're just going on the case of Shalo Lishmo. Kidiktani, but just like it says in the Mishnah, it says Shashachdan Shalo Lishman, that they were slaughtered not for their sake. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, V'chulan Sha'alu Chayin Lagavi Mizbeach. In all of these cases, if the animals go up on the Mizbeach while they are alive, so Yerdu, so then they have to come down, they have to be taken down from the Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, Hashchut and Lo Yerdu. The implication is that if they would go up on the Mizbeach slaughtered, then they wouldn't come down from the Mizbeach. And my lav, is it not? Loshna Kachay Kachim, Loshna Kachim Kalim. It doesn't matter if it's Kachay Kachim, it doesn't matter if it's Kachim Kalim. They are not going to come down from the Mizbeach, and this would seem to support what Ula said. Again, Ula said by Kachim Kalim, before the Zrika, they don't come down from the Mizbeach. Rashi explains, Tanan v'chulan shaluchayin kasal gadaitach. Initially we think, hakulan, the word kulan over here, when it says all of these cases, akol kachim ka'amar, it's going on all kachim, it's going on all animals that are designated as karbanos, v'achsherin kai, it's going on kosher animals, v'lo apsulin detani bereisha kai, it's not going on the disqualified animals that the Mishnah just said previously that were listed in the Mishnah. The lo shayich b'uchayin, because by those you can't talk about alive, the v'chol apsulin hanizkarim, because all of the disqualified animals that are mentioned, b'malu lo yerdu, that if they go up on the mizbeach, then they don't come down. Ein bohen psul mechayim, those were not cases of disqualification from when they were alive. Hilgach, therefore, aksherin kai, therefore it must be it's going on kosher animals. V'hai kulan al karchach kol hakachim kamar, so the word kulan must mean all kachim. Loshna kachay kachim, v'loshna kachim kalim, it doesn't matter if it's of greater sanctity or lesser sanctity, it's all kachim. V'kamar, and what is it saying in the Mishnah? It's saying, it's implying hashchutin lo yerdu, that if they are slaughtered animals, they don't come down from the mizbeach. Uvelachar zrikas damim lo itzrich, and it's not necessary to teach us that after the zrikas damim, lashmi'inon, that it's to teach us, it's not necessary to teach us that after zrikas damim, it's not going to come down from the mizbeach. Why should they come down from the mizbeach in such a situation? And so therefore it must be talking lifnei zrikas damim, both by kachim and by kachim kalim, and that would be a support for what Ula says. And the Gemara continues, lo, no, that's not necessarily what the Mishnah is saying. What you should infer from the Mishnah is as follows. Hashchutin, when it comes to slaughtered animals, mehen yerdu, some of them will come down from the Mizbeach, and mehen lo yerdu, and some of them will not come down from the Mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Umashani, the Gemara answers, lo teim hashchutin kulan lo yerdu, don't say all slaughtered animals don't come down. Elaim hashchutin yesh men yerdu, v'yesh men lo yerdu, by shchutin some do, some don't. Kachay kachim lo yerdu, if it's kachay kachim, they don't come down. Kachim kalim yerdu, if it's kachim kalim, they do come down. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'hakulan katani, but doesn't the Mishnah say the word kulan, all of them? How can we make a distinction and say some of them come down from the Mizbeach and some of them do not? And Rashi explains, V'hakulan katani, ma'ila v'adukya d'hashchutin lo yerdu namikai. Isn't this line of kulan going on the inference as well, that again the slaughtered animals, they don't come down, and that would mean all of the slaughtered animals, whether kachay kachim, whether kachim kalim, they don't come down from the Mizbeach? Wouldn't that be what the word kulam means? And the Gemara continues and says, not necessarily kulam achayin. It could be that the word kulam is going on the living animals that do come down from the Mizbeach. All living animals come down from the Mizbeach. But the Gemara says, Pshita, but that's obvious. Of course, if they're living animals, they come down from the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues and answers, Liolam achayin. Really, we are going on the living animals. Uvidukin shabayin, and we're going on blemishes that are in the cornea of the eye. V'aliba de Rabbi Akiva, and this Mishnah is going, or this part of the Mishnah is going, according to Rabbi Akiva, Diyamar im alu lo yerdu, who says that when it comes to these blemishes in the cornea of the eye, that kind of blemish, if it goes up on the Mizbeach, so then it does not come down from the Mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Kulan misham chayin nakat la, when it says the word kulan, that's going on the living animals, lemeimar de yerdu, to say that living animals that go up on the Mizbeach, they have to come down. The ein Mizbeach mekadesh chayin, the Mizbeach is not going to sanctify animals that are alive. And then the Gemara asks Pshita, well, that's obvious, the yerdu, of course they come down from the Mizbeach, because a living animal, after you do the shchita, can go back up on the Mizbeach, so of course you're going to take it down from the Mizbeach. Since we're talking about kosher animals, as Rashi said before. And the Gemara then says, Liolam achayin, really again, we are going, when we say the word kulan, it's going on the living animals, nakat kulan. That's why it says all of the living animals, they come down from the Mizbeach. Uli ashminan de yerdu, and to teach us that they come down from the Mizbeach. And so we asked, what is the chiddush of that? It seems obvious. Uvidukin shaba'ayin itzrich lashminan, we're talking about a situation where they have this blemish in the cornea of the eye, and it's needed to teach us shepsulan mechayim over there, while the animals alive already, there's a disqualification. And the point is, and when we take them off the Mizbeach, because they were up there when they were alive, so once we take it down, sulo maski, they don't go back up on the Mizbeach. Tekaimulan bipsulan, because the halach is by disqualified, kishem shem alu lo yerdu, just like if they go up, they don't come down, kachem yerdu lo yalu, so too if they go down, they don't go back up. V'afilu hachi yerdu, and nevertheless, they come down, the ein Mizbeach mekadesh chayim, chayim, because the Mizbeach is not going to sanctify animals that are alive. And so the point over here is again, since they are coming down, they are not going to go back up in this situation. And va'aliba de Rabbi Akiva nakadlo, the point over here is according to Rabbi Akiva, the Yomer b'masnisim, because Rabbi Akiva says in the Mishnah, Baalei Mumin, that when it comes to animals with blemishes, im olu lo yerdu, that if they go up on the Mizbeach, then they don't come down. Umukminon lo lekamon, and we're going to say later on, bedukan shaba'ayin, what kind of blemishes when they go up on the Mizbeach, they don't come down. That's if it's just a small blemish in the corner of the eye. V'yashminon masnisin, and so now the Mishnah is teaching us a chiddush. The Mishnah is saying, olu chayim, that if these animals with this small blemish go up alive, yardu, so then they come down from the Mizbeach. Hashchutin, but if they would already be slaughtered, lo yardu, so then they wouldn't come down from the Mizbeach, because again, we're following Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says that such a blemish, if they go up on the Mizbeach shchutin, lo yerdu, but if they go up chayim, so then yerdu, then they do come down from the Mizbeach. But the Gemara continues and asks, B'mayu kimta b'psulin, how can you say the Mishnah is talking about disqualified animals over here, talking about the live animals going up on the Mizbeach? Amos Seifa, look at the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes on to say, V'cheinola she'al sachai l'rosh ha-Mizbeach, by a carbonola that goes up alive on the top of the Mizbeach, teirit, it comes down, and shachta b'rosh ha-Mizbeach, but if it was slaughtered at the top of the Mizbeach, so yafshid v'yinotach b'makoma, so then it's flayed and it's cut in its place. And so the Gemara asks, V'i psula, now if we're talking about an animal that's actually disqualified, Bas hefshid v'nituachi, is that the kind of animal that we're going to flay, that we're going to cut up? V'nitach osa amarachmona, it says that you're going to cut it up. Osa ksheira v'lo psula, it's only when it's a kosher animal, it's not when it's a disqualified animal. And Rashi explains, V'nitach osa amrinan b'toras kohanim, it says again, you're going to cut up the animal. Ksheira v'lo psula means if it's kosher, not if it's disqualified. Shim nifsula kodem hefshid, that the halach is, if it was disqualified before being flayed, sorfa be'azara, gets burned in the azara. V'hanami barosh ha-mizbeach, and here also on the top of the mizbeach. Nihida lo teire, the kitchen mizbeach, granted that it doesn't come down, it was sanctified by the mizbeach. But miu lo boy hefshid v'nituach, but still it's not going to require being flayed and being cut up. And the Gemara continues and answers, Seifa, this end of the Mishnah, Asan l'ksheira, that's talking about a kosher animal. Umay kamash malon, and what is it teaching us? Yesh hefshid v'nituach barosh ha-mizbeach, that there's such a thing as hefshid v'nituach, flaying and cutting up the animal at the top of the mizbeach. And Rashi explains, Seifa demasnis and Asan l'ksheira, and the end of the Mishnah is talking about kosher animals. V'hachi kamar, and it's saying as follows, V'chein ola chaya ksheira, also when you have an ola that's alive, that goes up, that's kosher, that goes up on the mizbeach. Umay kamash malon, and so what is it teaching us? Pshita de teired, isn't it obvious that it comes down to hahadra salka, because in such a case it would go back up again? Umeshani, and the Gemara answers, hakamash malon, it's teaching us dehecha de shach de barosh ha-mizbeach, that if it was slaughtered at the top of the mizbeach, lo tzarich la'chosav asuk, you don't need to bring it down and bring it back up. V'yafagav de hadra salka, even though it's going to go back up, elam afshita barosh ha-mizbeach, you can flay it at the top of the mizbeach. But the Gemara continues and asks, according to the one who holds that there is no flaying and cutting it up at the top of the Mizbeach, so then what are we going to say? How are we going to explain the end of this Mishnah? And Rashi explains, Ein hefshid, there's a mandamar that says you can't do that at the top of the Mizbeach, hoel v'hadar matzi la'asuka, since you're able to bring this back up to the Mizbeach anyhow, lav orachara lahafshid sham, it wouldn't be proper derech eretz to flay it over there at the top of the Mizbeach. So what are we going to answer according to that Manda Amar? And the Gemara says, Hacha b'mayaskin, on here what are we dealing with? Kagon shahaisalo shasa kosher v'nifsala. There was a moment where it actually was kosher, but then it became disqualified. And Rashi explains, Hacha b'mayaskin on liolam kisha'olsa ksheira chaya. The case again in the Mishnah is, it went up and it was kosher, it went up alive. Umishashachta barosh ha-mizbeach, and then from the time it was slaughtered at the top of the mizbeach, v'zarak dama, and then the blood was thrown, from after that point in time, nifsala, then it became disqualified. Hilgach, therefore, yavshid v'yinotach b'makom, it should be flayed and cut in its place, because in such a situation, the imachis la, because if you're going to take it down now, sulo salka, it's not going to be able to go back up on the mizbeach. Udekash alach, and then you ask psula lav bas hefshidi, that when it comes to a disqualified animal, you're not supposed to flay it. The answer to that is kagon dehaisalo shasa kosher. The answer to that is that there was a moment where it was kosher lahefshid, it was kosher at one point in time to be flayed. Kodem psula bas hefshid, hefshed v'nituach, before the disqualification, it was able to be flayed and cut. V'afilu hi lamat, even when it was down below, not on the mizbeach. V'habasar pasul v'nisraf, and then the meat would be disqualified and it would be burned. The Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, and this follows the opinion of Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, as the Gemara will say. T'yomer l'kamon b'perak tvul yom. He's going to say later on in perak tvul yom, kevan shenizrak hadam v'hurtza basar. Since the blood was thrown and the meat was accepted shah achas for one moment, lahakter, to be burned, v'nifsal, and then there's a disqualification. So yafshitena, then you do flay it, v'ora l'kohanim, and the hide goes to the kohanim. V'yein ora nisraf ima, and the hide is not burned together with it. Hilka chashtanami, therefore now also, ki isa barosh hamizbeach v'nikteres boy hafshed v'nituach, when it's at the top of the mizbeach and it's burned, it does require the hefshed v'nituach, it requires to be flayed and to be cut up. As the Gemara continues and says, Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, he this follows, our Mishnah follows Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon, the Yamar who says, kevan shenizrak hadam v'hurtza basar sha'achas, once the blood was thrown and the meat was accepted for a moment, so yafshitena, you do flay the animal v'ora la kohanim, and then the hide, it goes to the kohanim. But the Gemara continues and asks, if we're talking here about a carbon that did become disqualified, so v'ela dekatani, but that which we learned in a brisa on the Mishnah, it says, Keitzad osa, what does he do in this case? Moridas hakirvaim lamata, he brings the innards down below off the mizbeach umadichan and rinses them. So lamali, what's the purpose of rinsing them? That doesn't make sense. It's not going to be burned on the mizbeach anyhow. And the Gemara says to that, well, hechinavid, well, what should we do? Nakrivenu beparasayu, are you not going to wash them? You're not going to rinse them and then offer them with the dung? Hakriveu no lefechasecha hayirtzecho o hayisa panecha, would you offer such a thing to your governor? Is that a proper way to give an offering? But the Gemara still continues and asks, Anon hachi kamrina, no, this is what we're saying. Madichan lamali, what's the purpose of rinsing? There's no purpose if it's not actually going to be burned on the mizbech. It's not going to be offered. And the Gemara says to that, the reason why we're rinsing them is, what happens if maybe another Kohen is going to find these innards? V'lo yada, he's not going to know, and so therefore naskinhu, therefore he might sacrifice it, and we don't want him to sacrifice it to offer it with the dung. And Rashi explains, Elahada Katani Ketzad Osa Bebraisa Zevachim. This is a Braisa in Zevachim. Garsinan Legabe Ola Shal Sachayla Mizbeach. We learn it by a case, like our case in the Mishnah, an Ola that goes up alive to the Mizbeach. V'shachta, and then it's slaughtered. V'kamer, and it says Yavshid V'inatech B'makom. Again, it says that it should be flayed and cut in its place on the Mizbeach. V'katani Seif, and then it says Morid. It says at the end, Morid Asakirvayim Lamata. He brings the innards down below Madichan and rinses them. V'ibib Psulan, if we're talking about a carbon that became disqualified, once he brings it down, it's not going up on the mizbeach anyhow. Umeshani, the Gemara answers, well, what should we do? Should we bring it with its dung, with its dung, bitmi? That's a question. And then the Gemara said, we're asking, why should it be rinsed? If it's not going up on the mizbeach anyhow, what's the purpose of rinsing? Umeshani, and the Gemara answers, the issue is maybe another Kohen won't know that it became disqualified, and it is going to be brought up and offered, and so therefore it should be rinsed off. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 85a Amud Beis.